Welcome to Between the Rows, where you get to hear the stories behind the stories in Canada's leading farm publications.
Hi, and welcome to Between the Rows. I'm Laura Rance, Vice President of Content for Glacier FarmMedia. You're listening to the third episode of a four-part series examining the impact of COVID-19 on agriculture. In this segment, host Gord Gilmour looks at how the livestock sector is faring. Gord starts with a conversation with Andrew Dixon, General Manager of the Manitoba Pork Council, about the challenges facing that sector.
Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for inviting me to talk to you.
So the pork sector, when I think of an integrated continental market, I think of the pork sector, quite frankly. So how does an industry like yours cope with something like this?
In terms of the COVID response, the industry, the key thing there is trying to deal with how it's going to impact on the labor force. And then there's the problems tend to show up as because somebody's not able to do what they were supposed to do, because everything is just-in-time delivery, all the way from the ingredients going onto the farm, when the pigs are being bred, and when they're supposed to be delivered to the processing plants, and the processing plants have to process the material within a certain period of time in order to get onto retail shelves, where there's a definitive timeline that product can stay on the shelf in world markets like Japan. So logistics are a huge issue in this industry. So when something comes along like COVID, which the public health measures, puts clamps on how normal business is done in order to slow down the spread of the disease, there are impacts. And so the industry is flexible, and it works out different ways of coping with problems. This COVID thing has happened in the context of another thing in the pork sector, in the sense that there was a major disease outbreak of African swine fever in China, and that's had an impact in terms of creating this idea there's going to be a major demand for pork. And so there's been a ramping up of production in North America in order to get ready to supply that market as the trade barriers come down. So COVID comes along in the middle of all these plans and has created some issues that we're trying to manage very carefully.
So what do you do then to keep some of these critical supply lines open? Can you think of some of the strategies that you could illustrate for us?
Well, for example, we ship because we're an integrated North American industry in Manitoba here, there's been a business has developed to supply baby pigs to finisher barns in southern Minnesota and Iowa. And it's been a long-time business, been around for over 20 years. It's been profitable, unprofitable, but generally a successful business. And they have to be transported. So when people say, when you go down to the United States and you come back, you need to self-quarantine for 14 days. Well, we can't do that with those truckers. There's not enough truckers to take them out of the system for 2 weeks. So a special exemption has been made by the public health authorities to allow that to happen. So it's not just us. Other industries are in the same boat. So all the trucking industry went to the government and said, look, in terms of normal flow of commerce, for commerce to work effectively between the two countries, because we're integrated, you need to set that one aside for the transportation industry, and the federal government did that. So that was an initial concern. The next one is starting to show up is things like, what can we do at the plants to make sure that our workers are safe? What can we do on our farms to make sure the workers are safe from the disease, and that workers who come to like a farm, or managers come to a farm or to a processing plant, that they don't infect their fellow workers or other members of their organization. So everybody is practicing higher than maybe required in terms of how they keep themselves clean, washing hands, avoiding social contact as much as possible outside the workplace, and then within the workplace, like how do we handle things like lunchrooms, how do we deal with cafeterias, how do staff change their clothes, safely so they don't bring infection to their fellow workers. Now, a lot of stuff we do on farm, for example, where we shower in and shower out, that all helps to reduce the potential for disease amongst the workers. I mean, all their clothing that they use in the barn is left in the barn, washed in the barn, and stays there. So there's things like, how do people get to work? Like, do we come in van loads or do we come in separate cars? Like, different ways of separating ourselves out so we don't contaminate or potentially spread the disease amongst our fellow workers. So then we get into supply issues. For example, because China went through the COVID thing, certain suppliers of things like minerals and vitamins, which certain companies in China were supplying to the market, they slowed down. And so there's been in the pipeline, some of the products that would be normally coming to us have slowed down, but they'll pick up as their economy kicks back into action again, and we'll start to see those pipelines fill up again. But in the meantime, we have to make sure we got enough on hand so we can cope while this interruption is overcome.
It almost sounds like a game of whack-a-mole as you describe it, that one problem you kind of wrestle to the ground and another one pops up.
Yes, and at the same time, we have to be cognizant of things like ASF is still a big disease in China. We don't want that coming to North America. We have enough problems as it is. We don't need that disease here because that would present a major challenge to the industry in terms of how to cope. So COVID is a serious issue from a public health perspective, and we fully appreciate that, and we're trying to do what we can to help. At the same time, we have to be cognizant of all these other issues, like to protect the industry from foreign diseases, etc. Now, as a result of COVID, there's been this sort of panic buying at the retail level, and you've probably heard all kinds of stories about meat shelves being empty and that sort of thing. The industry to supply the retail shelves in Canada, in terms of pork anyway, there's a certain volume of pork goes into the Canadian retail, both from Canada and from the United States, by the way, into our domestic retail market. There's only a certain volume per week that goes in, and it's planned for that. Sudden panic buying and taking material off the shelf and creating empty shelves doesn't mean that we go, okay, we can ship more product onto those shelves, because there isn't any more to ship. There's only a certain amount we do each week. Over time, and I'm talking 6 months to 9 months, we might be able to ramp up production, but at the same time, will the domestic demand return down to normal levels? And so there's a certain caution in terms of trying to ramp up production because of a temporary panic buying. And we suspect that the consumers, once they adapt to living with COVID and how to keep themselves safe and how to follow the public health measures, will realize we have a very safe and sound food production system for Canadians, and there's no need to do panic buying. There will be lots of meat to buy every week.
And that actually segues nicely to something I wanted to ask you about as well, which is, where is the future then for the hog sector? Because it seems to me that everybody's kind of running around fixated on the immediate dangers. But I mean, out the other end, I think that there's still a pretty bright future for the hog sector to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, our view on this thing is that we will get through this public health issue and this human disease issue. We're going to go through some tragic times, but we will come out of this, and normal levels of demand will return. And as the economy improves and people feel more comfortable, especially across the world, and economies continue to improve, like, say, the Chinese market improves, the Philippines market improves, Korea, etc., we will be able to ship some more product. So in the long run, the demand across the world for meat products is high, and all the graphs to date have shown there's increasing demand for pork products.
That's a much more hopeful note to end on, Andrew. Thanks for joining us today. That was Andrew Dixon of the Manitoba Pork Council talking about the current challenges and bright future of Canada's pork sector. You're listening to a special edition of Between the Rows, the podcast of Glacier FarmMedia. I'm your host for this section, Manitoba Co-operator Editor Gord Gilmour, and together we're decoding the impact of COVID-19 on the livestock sector. Before we jump into the panel discussion with Alberta Farmer Express's Alexis Kinlan, Lisa Gunther of Canadian Cattlemen, and Alexis Stockford of the Manitoba Co-operator, we're going to take a quick look at the cattle sector too. Like the pork sector, it's a large and continental marketplace, and it's largely export-oriented. Alexis Stockford took the time to talk to a number of people in the sector about what they're seeing. One thing that was immediately affected were bull sales, which were just getting underway. Doug McLaren of JAS Angus was planning his operations annual sale and was grappling with how to go ahead with the event in a new era. He felt their prior experience of using partial online systems could help serve them well this spring.
Fortunately, we've been online for a few years now, and it's been a video sale. So we don't normally put our bulls through the sales ring. We normally have them all on display in the facility in town, and so that may or may not happen. But the fact that we've had a video sale, I think we're somewhat. I don't know if you can call it ahead of the game, but we're somewhat prepared at least for this eventuality in that we do have a video sale. We've had the videos done. Our catalog is out now.
She also spoke to Mark Sholigan of Direct Livestock Marketing Systems, who said DLMS is prepared to deal with the jump in online auctions.
We probably already did about 330 sales on our internet broadcast platform this spring. We are adding as many more sales as people want, where we have staff and crew available for. I think over the next 5 days, we've added 6 or 7 sales already, and that's happening right across the industry, not only with our company but a couple of our competitors as well. Everyone's trying to add sales to help people out, to give their customers another option to still purchase bulls when they can't make it there.
That was Mark Sholigan of DLMS. You're listening to a special edition of Between the Rows, delving into COVID-19 and the livestock sector. I'm your host this week, Gord Gilmour. We're joined now by a panel of journalists who've been covering the livestock industry under COVID-19. There's the Manitoba Co-operators Alexis Stockford.
Hi, Gord. How's it going?
Good, thank you. Lisa Gunther of Canadian Cattlemen.
Hi, Gord.
Hi, Lisa. And Alexis Kinlan of Alberta Farmer.
Hi, Gord. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. Alexis K., I'll begin with you. Generally, in your impression, what's been the mood of the livestock sector?
Well, Gord, I've done a lot of interviews in the past couple weeks, and I think I can't remember who it was, but someone summed it up really well by saying the sector is calm but concerned. A lot of cow-calf people are, self-isolating out at their farms and they're calving. Business is still happening, but of course people are very mindful that this is a major health concern and that they've got, special things to do in order to stay safe and healthy.
And Alexis Stockford, now I know that you have talked to some people in the pork industry, in the pork sector. What have they told you?
Yeah, so I think the pork industry is obviously a little separate from the cattle industry in that, like Alexis pointed out, a lot of the cow-calf guys are self-isolating on their farms. And for them, I'm getting a sense of, there is a certain amount of business as normal because, they're in the middle of calving. And this is, of course, something that they're seeing all the time on the news, that they know that this is a concern that's out there. And at the same time, they're in the middle of calving. They've got their regular things that they still have to do. And I think that for the cow-calf guys, in a lot of cases, it's a little easier for them, I think, to self-isolate because, a lot of those operations are kind of family-run anyway. And the pork sector is a little bit different in that it is more vertically integrated. It is more corporate, I guess, if that is the word. And so, they're running into things like, for example, in their hog barns, which have more external staff, there is a concern that, if COVID-19, if the virus gets into the barn and some of their staff get sick, it's not like they can just just shut down the business and send everyone home, because there are, the animals still have to get fed. There are sows that are fair. Someone has to be at those barns, and so that's certainly a concern.
And Lisa, you look at the cattle industry fairly intensely. What's your impression?
I have a similar impression as Alexis Kinlan, which is just that people are fairly calm. It's not an industry that tends to light its hair on fire, and they're pretty focused on adapting and adjusting. For example, if they're going to bull sales or that kind of thing. I mean, I don't think there's too many people actually going to bull sales at this point. They're moving online and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's an industry that's pretty focused on just practical adaptations at this point, I think.
And Lisa, where do you see the biggest threats to the sector?
Oh, well, I think just any disruptions in the supply chain. Things should keep moving, but I was reading today, for example, that truckers do not have access to public washrooms. So you have to think, if that's going to continue, how are they going to be able to continue doing their job? I guess the border is always a potential concern, but so far it looks like that's going to remain open to trade, including live cattle and our the Canadian Cattlemen's Association and the other groups are kind of on top of that and watching that. So it's hard to say right now, but those are kind of the threats that I see.
And Alexis Stockford, what are you thinking about for the pork industry?
Well, not just for the pork industry, but for the beef industry as well. I think there is some concern when you get into sort of the processing side, because in the last week we have heard of a number of plants. There was a beef plant out of Alberta, as well as a pork processor out of Quebec, that have had to at least temporarily shut down some of their operations, just because of some cases that have popped up among their staff. And so I think there's maybe some concerns and there's some questions that way, in terms of making sure that there are enough staffing levels at the processing level, that they don't get, that there isn't a bottleneck there. And then I guess just in terms of the pork industry, and once again, just going back into the what production in the pork industry looks like, there's obviously some concerns about this is an industry that requires a lot of regular animal movement. It requires a lot of regular feed transportation, and all that then requires truckers and travel across provinces and all this. And every one of those is a potential avenue for infection. And so the industry has had to take a good step back and look at, okay, how do we maintain our supply chain without interruption, just given that there is this threat out there.
Alexis Kinlan, do you share those same sort of concerns about the supply chain?
Yeah, definitely. From what I've heard of people, they're just concerned about processing plants. I did a dairy interview where things were running well, but they were concerned about, again, processing plants. With dairy, they've also, I know with beef too, in some of the plants they've ramped up production, and dairy has ramped up production as well. So I guess when the pandemic started, fluid milk sales in Canada jumped by 40%. So they're ramping up production, but again, there's a fear in the plants. Another fear that I've heard a lot of is just I had like 2 calls today, and people were just mentioning the potential lack of PPE, personal protective equipment, because a lot of people. A lot of it is going to medical use, but there's also people that are potentially buying things maybe that they shouldn't be buying at the UFA, and potentially leaving agricultural people out high and dry without access to masks or gloves or something.
And
that's another.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's another issue that people are thinking about. Just making sure that they have access. I talked to a goat producer today who is in the middle of kidding. So, I mean, the goat industry is very small, but right now it's a really busy time for a lot of goat producers. They're kidding, and, most of them have other jobs as well. So she just said maybe, if you're making that run into town to get groceries, just make sure that you have all your PPE supplies and have picked up all your kidding supplies from the stores, just a precaution that you got everything at the farm that you need and don't have to make an extra trip into town.
I'm just going to chip in here, Gord. This is Alexis Stockford here. This is going to get very confusing here. I'm just going to chip in really quickly. I did speak to the Federal Agriculture Minister's office yesterday, who they basically said, in terms of the processing, and in terms of obviously they're very concerned about making sure that there is no interruption in the supply chain, and they basically said that at this point the CFIA has basically moved all of their activities to high priority activities to make sure that there are enough inspectors and such on duty so that those production lines are not interrupted.
Okay, thanks. Alexis Kinlan, I'll start with you this time. What are some of the key changes you see taking place that are starting to affect the industry, or that where the industry is being proactive?
Well, definitely, like I said, ramping up production. I think some groups are really taking just talking to their members, like the small industry groups have been. Canadian Cattlemen's has had a lot of town halls where they just kind of disseminate what they're talking about. A lot of groups I've talked to have, some groups have phoned all their members, just so really keeping in touch. And what's also come up in several conversations I've had is just associations, like, again, the goat producers or Alberta Milk, have reached out to producers and included mental health information as well, just so producers have resources or know that they have colleagues that they can talk to in their organizations. In other things, people are just looking to do things like continue the social distancing even when working in a various plants or on the farm, extra hygiene measures, extra cleanings, remembering to sanitize tools or things that are used by multiple people. Those are definitely some of the things that I see and have heard of industry doing.
Lisa, anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I think one thing I've noticed was how quickly the industry started shifting events online. For example, the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef shifted its semi-annual meeting online quite quickly. And we've seen the same thing with livestock sales as the maximum allowable crowd size has dropped and dropped and dropped. Fortunately, the industry was kind of already prepared for something like this, I suppose, in that they had online sales well established. The other thing that is changing right now is on the ag research front. Universities are having to prioritize which projects are going to go ahead, and they haven't. I think they're still in the middle of evaluating that, but I think we're going to see some delays in ag research projects. Probably some projects will see like a year delay in getting results if they're not able to seed their trials, for example, this year. But it really depends. They have different criteria, including whether researchers and staff are able to follow safety protocols and still carry out the research, and how much has already been invested in those projects up front. So, yeah, there are quite a few changes taking place right now.
Thank you. Alexis?
I would just sort of add, I would just sort of add into that one of the things that I see is some changes more along the lines of, once again, the transportation aspect of it, and just in terms of some of these barns, some of these processors, and just what they're doing to try and safeguard their staff, or the transportation industry, and what they're doing to safeguard their drivers just limiting interaction between the drivers and the farmyard, just limiting contacts and potential avenues of transmission among processing staff, and just some changes that way in terms of what daily life looks like for some of these people when they go to work.
And I will stick with you, Alexis Stockford. For the last question, I'll start with you again. And I'm going to ask all of you this, so put your thinking caps on. What about signs of hope on the horizon? Are there any good things that you can see that could come out of this?
I mean, I guess one of the things that I see is there is, and we've even seen it in the news, that there is suddenly a lot of emphasis, I guess, on the importance of food supply systems, and we've heard that that these are essential services. And I think there is maybe a feeling in the back of some people's minds that this is maybe an opportunity to, like, because we hear all the time, the importance of telling, quote unquote, telling our story, right? And I think there is a feeling that this might be a bit of an opportunity for that, just because there is so much emphasis right now on is there food on the grocery shelves right now.
And Lisa, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I agree with Alexis Stockford. That's one thing that's come up with. I was just talking to the Dean of Veterinary Medicine at the U of C last week, and he sees the same thing, just an opportunity to engage people more, people who are probably going to be more interested in food production following this. And hopefully that becomes a long-term thing, and we're able to turn it into a constructive opportunity.
Great, thanks. And Alexis Kinlan, what would you say?
I would echo the comments of Lisa and Alexis that yes, this has been kind of a moment for the food supply industry food supply chain to shine, and I think it's really highlighting the adaptability of people working in Canadian agriculture and in the food supply industry, and just a lot of people making necessary changes to make sure that Canada has a food supply. I also read, I think it was an article from Sylvain Charlebois that was saying that in Canada we are very lucky, and we're very unlikely to have food shortages during this COVID-19 pandemic. And we also are still an export nation. We are producing a lot of food, and we are going to be supplying food to other countries in the world. And a lot of organizations are still working to get, for example, our pork and beef and other products to other markets outside Canada that are also experiencing COVID-19.
That was Alexis Kinlan of Alberta Farmer, Lisa Gunther of Canadian Cattlemen, and Alexis Stockford of the Manitoba Co-operator. Thanks so much to all three of you for joining us today.
Thanks, Gord.
Thank you.
You've been listening to a special edition of Between the Rows, the podcast of Glacier FarmMedia. This segment has been delving into the impact of COVID-19 on the livestock sector. I'm your host, Gord Gilmour, editor of the Manitoba Co-operator, wishing you all the best and hoping you and yours stay safe and healthy.
Be sure to listen in to our fourth and final episode of this special series of Between the Rows. In the next segment, host Dave Bedard focuses on the risks and the opportunities for farm financial managers. I'm Laura Rance.
Between the Rows is a production of Glacier FarmMedia, Canada's leading farm publisher. We'd love to hear what you think of the show and invite you to send your comments to btr@farmmedia.com or visit us at membersgetmore.ca and sign up today